How's it going, everybody? My name is Lee Woodmansee, and I'm the campus minister here at the Baptist Collegiate Ministry at the University of Arkansas at Fort Smith. You are catching us right here in the middle of session 8, which is our exploration of Elizabeth and Mary. And so you should have seen the title card earlier where you should have read Luke chapter 1 and Luke chapter 2. So we're going to be doing an in-depth discussion of those two chapters. So if you haven't read that, you need to do that. So go ahead and pause this video, go read that, then come back because we're not going to have time to walk through every verse. So you just need to have it in your head. So today I have the pleasure of being joined by a good friend of mine. I have actually known her, I added up the other day, I think for about 12 years. Going back all the way to whenever I was a college student at the University of Arkansas up in Fayetteville. And at that time, she was the campus minister at UCA. And that person that I am joined with is Bit Stevens. Bit, how are you, ma'am?
I'm good. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Well, Bit, I want to go ahead and tell you this story just because I want to be really clear as to when I really remember meeting you. I knew you from being a campus minister down in UCA, but also whenever I worked for Lynn up in Fayetteville. So I knew you, but the first time that I really remember meeting you was actually in Nanning, China.
Oh, yes.
Doing a Christmas in China, and our two different teams were just oddly enough in the same city for one of our Christmas parties that we were doing. And I remember being at this Christmas party with 600 Chinese students and our team of Americans, and then another team of Americans walk in, and it's you and Brad Carr.
Yep.
Do you remember that?
I do remember.
I don't remember the circumstances that
you.
led us to like being at the same party at the same time, but
wow,
that's kind of crazy, right?
That's neat. That's neat. Yeah.
Rock on. Well, Bit, tell us a little bit about yourself. You've worked with college students for a long time. Presently, you work as the International Student Ministry coordinator. Consultant. I messed it up already. You are the consultant here for the Arkansas Baptist State Convention when it comes to international student ministry. So how about you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
I'll be glad to. I've been working in BCM, Baptist Collegiate Ministry, for over 30 years. This is my 31st year. Began it here in Arkansas, altogether about 34 years.
That's just a few.
Yeah, just a few, yeah. And in 07, I had a house church experience in China, actually. And God used that to kind of change the direction of my heart and ministry toward international students. And a couple years ago, I was able to move to the convention, to the headquarters, to begin working with BCMs and churches to help promote, encourage, and strengthen international student ministry on their campuses.
Gotcha. And so you don't actually reside at any single campus. You are wherever international students are in Arkansas, yeah?
Yes, and where people are who have a heart to want to work with them.
There it is. I like that. So today we are talking about Elizabeth and Mary. And normally when we talk about those two characters, we kind of reverse those two people. We normally say Mary and Elizabeth.
That's true.
And I think that's just kind of out of deference, and we just kind of, defer to Mary as being more important. But that's not actually how the narrative actually works out. And so if our students have read Luke chapter 1 and 2, there's some details there that we need to pick up on. So how about you just go ahead and recap for us narratively what actually happens in Luke chapter 1 and Luke chapter 2 to set us up for the conversation.
Okay, be glad to. I'd like to start out just for a second. Luke was a medical doctor, but he was also a scientist, and he was well educated. And in being along those lines, he was a great researcher, and he investigated this story well. All these stories in his gospel and also in the book of Acts, he did well on researching that. And I love what he says up here. And he's writing this to Theophilus, which is either a friend of God, or it means friend of God, or it was a particular person. We're just not real sure. But he said this: I decided to write an orderly account for you. And in doing that, we know that what we're going to read is incredible. There's probability that he got a lot of his research from Mary. And Elizabeth was probably already with the Lord, or in that holding place, wherever she was, her and
Right.
Zechariah were. But anyway, that's tremendous background to understand that. And I think in doing so, we have to be reminded in Malachi, the end of Malachi, which was written 400 years earlier, or there's a difference, but there's a quietness from God for 400 years. And some of the last words that was heard from God was that he was going to send someone in the spirit of Elijah. And we see that promise coming to fruition right here with Zechariah and Elizabeth. And so that's kind of where we pick up the story. Back in Second Chronicles, I believe it was, maybe in First Chronicles, David instigated. There were 20,000 priests through the lineage of Aaron that were during that day, and those priests were divvied up into groups of about 1,000 and they were, and in that 1,000 for a 2-week period every year, they would go and they would do their temple work.
Do their rotation.
That's right. They did their rotation at that time, and they would go and set up the place for worship. They did the responsibilities of that, and they would, one person would be chosen of that to go and give incense into the worship area. And when people saw the incense being burned, then they knew it was time to pray.
It's time to go.
The Lord. Yeah.
It's time to do it.
And so the odds of that falling on someone was 1 in 800 to 1,000. But at this particular time, it fell on Zechariah to do this. And so it was just God's timing. When you look at it, it wasn't just a coincidence, but it was a providence of God that called Zechariah out, and the lot fell on him as they cast lots. And he's the one that went in. And when he went in, he had this prayer on his heart from years of his and Elizabeth's marriage. They were old. They were very old, is what my Bible says,
Right.
and past childbearing.
Right.
And she had been barren and couldn't have a child their whole married life. We don't know how they were. I'm sorry, but what we do know is that she couldn't have children, and it had not been possible. And their hearts were just, that was the heart cry of their prayer, was that two things. One, that God would give them a child, but also that God would bring the Messiah. They longed for the Messiah to come. And so during this time, Zechariah goes to into the temple, and as he walks in, there's Gabriel on the right side of
just
the
hanging
holy
out in
place.
the temple.
Yeah.
Just there.
Just there, that's right. And he starts speaking to John. John, as soon as he sees him, he's frightened, he's fearful. But he begins to tell him, and I love this because he goes in, and this is what now, I don't know about you, but if I walked in and there's an angel and he starts speaking to me, I'm not going to remember what he said, I don't think.
It's time to flip out, is what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
But he remembered it. And listen to the promise that he gave him here in chapter 1 of Luke. And we'll start with verse 13. Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear a son, and you are to call him John. He will be a joy and a delight to you. Isn't that interesting that that's the first things he says? And many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. And he goes on and talks about how he's supposed to live. And he also says he's going to be filled with the Holy Spirit from birth, before he is born. And we're going to get a look at that here in just a minute.
Right.
So it's just phenomenal. This is where the promise of Malachi comes in. And he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the parents to their children. Boy, wouldn't that be sweet today? And also to turn in the disobedient, and turn the children's hearts back to their parents, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteousness, and to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. He is going to be the forerunner of Jesus. So that's where we get to. And so anyway, but here's what happens with Zechariah. He asks this question, and he says, how can I be sure of this? And I don't think Gabriel, I don't think he gets upset with him.
He's not vindictive.
He's not vindictive. He just says, I stand before God Almighty, and I'm telling you this. This is
My
true.
word is enough.
Yeah. But for proof, you won't be able to speak. I'm not sure if he wasn't able to hear, but he wasn't able to speak. We know that for sure. And so this is what he leaves the temple with. He goes outside and has to make signs to everybody and gives a blessing, and then he's home to see his wife, because I'm sure he's thinking, it has to be going to be true. or because I can't speak. And so he's thinking all these things, so he knows that he can go home and write it out to Elizabeth and share with her what's about to happen.
Right.
So
the message is then communicated from Zechariah to Elizabeth.
That's right.
Somehow, writing, whatever.
That's right. Yeah, right. Somehow. But can you imagine Elizabeth's expression? But I'm sure, here's the thing, though, is the culture of her being barren was, it was perceived that you were not blessed by God. It was really shameful. And there could have been, they lived in a community of people from Aaron's race that was more prone to holiness and everything. So maybe they didn't have the disgrace that was pointed out to them that we may see in Mary's background of Nazareth and stuff. You wonder how many times they were hearing voices of children and longing for that time when they might hear their own. Yeah. There was just all this in the background. They had certainly lived with disappointment over time and everything, just trying to, they would get their hopes up and then only to be disappointed again. But here's the interesting thing about this is that they were viewed as, they were known as righteous in God's eyes. And that's phenomenal here. This meant that they lived in private what they professed about God in public. Now that's huge, and we need to. That's something that we're going to come back and hammer home a little bit later. But during this time, we know that we know that she could not have a child from a physiological standpoint. But here's the cool thing: because they were such godly, and God saw them as righteous in His eyes, they did not let their barrenness become bitterness. Isn't that cool?
No.
Oh my goodness. I've got a lot of friends that have struggled with not having children. And just to see their whole process of going through that and struggling to not be bitter and to be faithful to the Lord. And one of my best friends, her and her husband struggle with that, but they're in their later years, and they are so loving their church, and they're mentoring so many young couples in the church now. And had there been bitterness, that wouldn't have ever happened in their life.
Yeah,
so,
and I think even just personally for mine, Casey's story. I mean, I know that Casey had 2 miscarriages before we had Sophia, but in the meantime, between those 2 miscarriages, when we started fostering, and that wasn't like we fostered and then adopted because of desperation. We felt like that's what God was leading us to do. But to say that there wasn't like this innate longing to have children, that would be inaccurate. And that is something that is one, it's far more prevalent than I think people think in our churches. Miscarriages in general, I think, are not, obviously they're not celebrated, but they're not spoken of as though it's something like that God openly deals with in a church. But but I mean, obviously the text doesn't tell us that Elizabeth had miscarriages, but at the same time, like, she still has the same pain of not having children. And so we kind of end at the same place in many ways. And I think that's really key for us to see that this is something that she's carrying with her all the way up until Zechariah communicates to her. Yeah, that's good.
Oh, that's good. I appreciate you sharing that, because I know that's hard. And one thing to note, a lot of people will think that miscarriages, or old school, they would think that miscarriages, it's the lady.
She did something wrong.
But it's more than that. It's the lady that's grieving, and it's not the husband.
Yeah,
that's not true.
Sure.
It's both, because they're both invested in wanting to have children with each other, and I know that pain is real on both sides there. One of the things that I want you to know is when God hears our prayers, He doesn't answer our prayers when we need to, or when we think He should. Sometimes, as we've heard, the answer is yes. Sometimes it's no. Sometimes it's wait a while, and that was true for Abraham and Sarah, about to have a baby and stuff. They're wanting one for a long time, and but the child was, the fact that they were going to have a child was an incredible blessing. But for him to be a boy also was huge, and that was just a deep heart desire for both of them, I believe. But also, to top it all off, that this son would be the one to announce the coming Messiah. He's going to pave the way. He's going to help people understand that they need to repent, so that for the forgiveness of their sins, so they can be pointed on the right road to receive the Messiah. I love this description. I can't imagine, and we'll see this a little bit more, but I love the description of joy that I've heard, and it's joy is peace dancing.
Okay.
Isn't that cool?
Where'd
Just
you
to
pick that
think
up
about. A friend shared it with me years ago, and I just loved it. It's that place of being so overjoyed, you don't know how to express it. And
Right.
we'll see a little bit more of that come out here
Yes.
in just a couple of minutes or so. God keeps his kingdom promises. That's what we've got to get on God's agenda, not get him in on our agenda. So our prayers of our heart need to be toward his purposes. And I love this Psalms 37:4. This is probably one of my favorite verses that I live by in life, and it's this: delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desire of your heart. Mm-hmm. And I interpret that as long as we delight ourselves in him, he plants those desires in our hearts, and he will fulfill those desires. And but there's things that I wanted before I was a Christian that I just didn't want anymore. After I became a Christ follower and was falling in love with the Lord, my desires changed.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a coach. I didn't want to be a coach anymore. I wanted to serve the Lord.
Right.
So
Going back to your comment about prayer, I've heard a pastor say it this way: is that God he only answers prayer in two ways. He either says yes, or he gives you something better. And the yes is in line with his will, or the something better very well may be no or wait, but either way, that's better than just giving you the thing right now. But that doesn't change that desire may be there. It just may not be in the right time.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Good.
That was I like that better than mine.
Was not original to me, so I couldn't tell you who said it first, but it ain't me.
It's good though. I can't imagine what they felt like though, knowing that they were going to have a baby and everything. And I think about Ephesians 3:20 and 21 also, that he is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond all that we could ever ask or think. And to him be the glory and all the honor in all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Isn't that great? And I love this passage too. Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Just beautiful. So we can really trust God with our whole life. We can really give him everything and live a life of faithfulness to him, as Elizabeth and Zechariah did. And I think I don't know if I covered this, that Elizabeth and Zechariah both were of the lineage of Aaron.
Aaron, yeah.
Yeah, and which means Elizabeth was a preacher's daughter, basically, and Aaron was a preacher's son, and became a preacher. Not Aaron, I'm sorry, but Zechariah was a preacher's son, and he became a preacher also.
Right.
And so, and what's cool is their family, they were bred with the heart for God. It wasn't just legalism. It wasn't just keeping the law to keep the law and then go home at night and talk about other stuff that wasn't godly. It was, they were saturated with an awe, a respect for God.
That's where we really see it there. And if you're looking there in Luke chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, that's where you're really referencing this. And the phrases that are specifically used is that they were righteous before God and walking blamelessly, not in some of the commandments, not in most of the commandments, but all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. I think it's like a really high bar to be set.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like that's clearly how they're described, and that's who they were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was a beautiful example of being one. As husband and wife, or you really want, when you go home and you're encouraging, you're spurring one another on to walk with the Lord and everything. And that was their life. And I love this, and we'll see this in a little bit too, but Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, this is the kind of lady that Elizabeth was, that she learned to trust in the Lord with all of her heart and not lean on her own understanding of why they couldn't have children. But she acknowledged the ways of God and trusted him to direct her paths. And even when it was the darkest moments for them, they believed God and they rested in him. Not that they might have children, but they just knew he was God and he knew what was best.
And he was enough.
Yes, he was enough. That's exactly right. And we're going to talk a little bit about Mary now. We're going to transition over to her. And I know probably people have heard more about Mary, maybe. And I honestly probably spent a little bit more time on Elizabeth just because of that
Right.
a little bit.
Well,
But
and I think, just to be candid, I think that a lot of times when we compare this story, we always give deference to Mary and Elizabeth, but really a lot of times who we're comparing is Zechariah and his response to Gabriel and Mary's. But I mean, one, that's just not the focus of this series with women through the Bible. But at the same time, like Mary and her response is different than Zechariah, but it's very similar in a lot of ways. But also we can see how Elizabeth's response to the announcement of John going to be born is directly related to how Zechariah responded as well. So it's not too different there. So I'm with you. Yeah, let's dive in with that.
Yeah. And I'll say this, I'm older, moving toward my senior years, and I hate to admit that, but it's true. But here's the thing I've noticed is when God puts it on people's hearts at my age or so to do something different, to take a different turn in their ministry or their life, or they're living a life serving God in the world as far as secular job, those kind of things, and that's their ministry. And God calls them out of that. And it is hard for them to, I met a lot of pastors that said, I was 40 years old before God called me to preach. Can you imagine what kind of, and they have maybe a triple or 6-digit income, and they move to a double digit real quick, kind of thing. But it's that kind of faith that you step into, and it's hard. It's a lot harder. And so those questions rise up.
It's natural.
It is natural. It doesn't mean that you are angry or upset about this, but it's just like you just question how, you want to throw the fleece out there like Gideon did and stuff. So
I mean, the attitude that we respond with, we're in control of, but maybe not necessarily that impulse is. I think that is natural. Now, how we handle that impulse, that's very different, and I think that is the difference between Zechariah and Mary.
Yes.
Sure. Cool. All right. So, Mary,
here we go. She submitted to God, knowing full well the ordeal which awaited her. She placed her social position and her marriage and her fiance at the time and her very life in jeopardy for the sake of God's will. Here she is. She's going to she's just going about her day and everything, and Gabriel shows up. This is the second time that we know of Gabriel coming in 6 months. Before that, the only one that we have reference to is Daniel. A long time before that. I mean, hundreds of years before that was the last time that Gabriel showed up. Maybe the only times that we know of in Scripture, actually, in Old Testament and New Testament. But there we go. Gabriel shows up to her and says, "Hey, Mary, you're going to have a baby," and and he's going to be the Messiah. He's going to be the Son of God, and
the Son of the Most High.
Yeah, the Son of the Most High God. And what she asks is, "How can this be since I'm a virgin?" And he talks about and says the Spirit of the Most High will come over you, and at that point you will conceive and you will become pregnant with the Messiah. And she says, and this is I don't know, I don't think she's 18. She may be. Who knows how old she is?
Late teenage years.
Yes, hopefully,
maybe,
yes,
generously.
Yes. And he comes to her, and here she has got her whole life in front. I'm sure she's seen some guys around there that she thinks, I hope that's the one that might ask me to marry him. But she may have been a regular teenage girl, but at the same time, she was so pure in her devotion to the Lord as well. And he came to her, and that's one of the first things he said. You are highly esteemed, and he tells her that she's going to have a baby, and she simply says, "May it be done to me as you have said," and that's incredible for someone that age. But here's something that I have. I want to share you this story. I'm checking to see if I missed something here. I want to share with you about a friend of mine named Katie. Katie was from China, and she moved here to Little Rock area to go to school about 4 years ago. She started hearing about God. The Americans just kind of come around her and just loved her. And she got plugged in with some other Chinese that had given their heart to Christ and were following him. And God began tugging on her heart. But she remembered this. Before she got on the plane to come to America, her parents said to her, stay away from those Christians.
Don't get tangled up there.
Yeah, stay away from the Christians. I've heard what happens over there. Well, Katie came over here, and for probably a year, she struggled with the Lord because she was beginning to realize that God was real, because she grew up thinking that God was not real, more atheistic. And she gave her, in October of 2017, she gave her heart to Christ. And in her testimony, she said, I decided that even though my parents told me not to do this, not to hang out with Christians, I saw that God was real, and I thought, okay, I can become a Christian and help share Christ with them so that they may see the light. Now, you talk about counting the cost.
Yeah.
Because she knew that they would, one could disown her, another thing's cut her off financially, and she'd be left over here with no money because they were paying for her education. So she risked it, and she did the hard thing. It took her a few months to get built up in her spirit, to begin talking to them and telling them what happened in her life. Of course, they were suspicious something had happened, but she began to tell them, and they became very angry with her, very upset for a long time. It wasn't until, after about 2.5, 3 years, just recently, actually during 2020, her mom started saying, okay, tell me a little bit more about God. And so you just never know what's going to happen. Here's the other part of that story, is that Katie was killed in a car wreck 3 weeks ago. And Katie also struggled with depression. And when her parents, when that got tough, she really went into a deep place sometimes. And we'd rally around her and try to help get her out and stuff, and hang out with her a lot more and those kind of things. But in May, she come up out of a depression, and it was like God just liberated her. I mean, she was set free. And she was going around spurring everybody else on to get back in church, to become more faithful in following God. She loved going to these Christian camps, and so she was going to be graduating in December, and it looked like she was going to be heading home. So she knew that she had to get built up in her spirit to go home, to live in that darkness, and to speak the truth, continue to speak the truth. So Katie had gone to this Christian camp, and she was returning from that Christian camp, and that's when the incident happened that took her life. But here's what's happened since then. 4 Americans have given their heart to Christ. The people that were at the wreck, that showed up at the Americans that showed up at the wreck, have recommitted their life to Christ. They realized that this car had been to a Bible camp, and that they loved Jesus. And only one of them passed away, and it wasn't one that should have passed away, honestly, because the impact where she was setting was the least. So it's like the Lord just said, Katie, come on home. Come on to my home, and we're going to set you free. But not just that, also her church here in Little Rock has taken up the torch, and they're sharing the gospel with her parents. So I believe that God's just putting an exclamation point on her life to do that. So when you surrender your life to Christ, like Mary did, you could expect these beautiful things to happen.
And I think one thing that I want to throw in there is that we will talk about in the outro, because we had mentioned it in a previous session whenever we talked about Hannah. You can see the card up in the video description here. We said that there's a lot of similarities between Hannah and her song and Mary and her song, but there's also some pretty glaring differences. Hannah specifically prayed and begged God for a son. Mary didn't,
That's right.
And she was given a gift of this. And Hannah had this reproach that was removed, and this shame that was removed, and then she was elevated. Whereas Mary, she was from a position of purity to derision, culturally, possibly. And so, like, that is what you're talking about with this counting the cost. Like, we can see that those are mirror images in many ways, but they still land in the same place of trusting God and following what it is that He would have for them.
That's good. Yes. Yeah. Similar to Elizabeth and Mary. Same
Exactly.
thing, Well, here's what's cool is I think that what's neat, one of the things that Gabriel also said to Mary was that, hey, and your cousin Elizabeth, she's pregnant, 6 months pregnant. And I think he just kind of dropped that in there because Mary had no one she could talk to. She couldn't tell her fiance. She couldn't tell her parents. You know, they were going to think she's crazy, you know. So she says, I'm going to go visit my cousin, you know. So real quickly, it's about a 3-day hike, about 70 miles from what I understand down there. And so she made it down there and spent 3 months with Elizabeth. But the greeting was what is phenomenal here. Mary walks into the door. We don't know where Zechariah is at this point, but Mary walks.
We literally don't hear from him.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I hadn't thought about that.
Right.
Yeah, not at that point. Yeah, I don't know if we do again, but Mary walks in, and Elizabeth turns around, and of course Mary sees that she's pregnant. She sees the evidence of John. She's 6 months along, but John, the son in Elizabeth's body, leaped for joy. Mm-hmm. He leaped in I think at that point when he became filled with the Spirit. Well, the overflow of that, Elizabeth became filled with the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And she sees Mary. Mary's not showing any signs of pregnancy, but she sees Mary, and she immediately talks to her and says, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. And who am I that the mother of my Lord would come to me?" And the cool thing, we were talking about this earlier, Lee, was that there's humility there's not jealousy in Elizabeth. There's humility. There's the faithfulness of God carrying out his kingdom purposes that she sees. Her son's going to be the forerunner. Here's the Messiah coming through her cousin. Just phenomenal. And the joy that erupted in their heart. I've been trying to think what I could do to compare it. And I know people, when they have children, I'm thinking about in 1 John 1, it talks about how these things we write to you, we tell you that our joy may be complete. Yeah. And so that's kind of that, it's that kind of joy. Recently, this last spring, my sister, who I'd been praying for 40 years, came to faith in Christ. And the crazy thing is, I found out about it. She came to a night when I was speaking and didn't think anything about it, you know, and was just really trying to give them Jesus, you know, and let them see who he is and how much he loves them. And it wasn't until later that I realized that she had checked the box, so to speak, on a piece of paper that someone had passed out that night, and that tonight she'd asked Jesus in her life, you know, and that didn't dawn on me for about a week, 2 weeks or so, and I'm like, she was the fifth one, you know, she was one of those. And I've started watching her, started getting real close to her and hanging, because I thought it was kind of like Zechariah. How will I know? You know, I'm going to know for sure. There's some things between her and her kids and stuff that have been dysfunctional for a while, and I thought, I can't go tell them. They need to see it, you know. And so I just come along beside her, and I'm telling you what, I don't have words to say what this means to me. I have a sister twice, you know, a blood sister, and what it's done for our relationship, and just that restoration of family, you know, and watching what God's doing in her life in healing with her family members and stuff. I just got a text from her the other day. It said she's been spending time with her grandchildren, and she says, I'm doing my best to tell them about Jesus. You know, there's no words from me.
Right.
But that wasn't true for Mary and Elizabeth. Elizabeth, one of the things she's noted for is she spoke the first beatitude in the New Testament. You know, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. That's pretty cool. And it produces a song through Mary. And here's what's cool. Mary sings the first song of the New Testament. She sings the first Christian song. Isn't that cool to think about? She's tying in the Old Testament to the New Testament and bringing the Messiah here. And so the first worship song really came. We still are in reference to it today and stuff. So that's just really neat. But I want you to think, one of the things I want you to think about is, what is it that brings you the greatest joy? Is it things in the world, or is it things of God? Because there is no comparison to what the kind of joy the world can give you compared to the kind of joy that God gives you. And the cool thing about the joy God gives us, and the promises that He fulfills that impact His kingdom and that affects us. That joy of His kingdom coming in our lives while we're here on earth, and we'll get to experience forever and ever and ever and ever. Yes, that's a good word. Yeah, it's just phenomenal. Some other things that were really cool that happened in around the birth of Christ and stuff. We talk about, her and Elizabeth and everything, and how incredible. Wouldn't you want to go and be there for 1 week of those 3 months, just that they were together, just to hear their conversation? Wouldn't that be cool? My favorite book of the Bible, or my favorite story in the Bible, is Jesus on the road to Emmaus, because Jesus shows up and with the two,
they're in
with
Luke
the two
22, Luke 24.
Yeah, and Jesus shows up and it unfolds to them the whole mystery of the Old Testament, the prophets, and He explains to them why the Messiah had to come. And they're like, didn't our hearts burn within us? And I think that's what's going on here with Mary and Elizabeth, is their hearts is just burning, with the fire of the Holy Spirit. Okay, here's some things that Mary, some things that Mary experienced and stuff, and some things that Luke told about in relation to Mary. He talked about her and Elizabeth's experiences, what it was like when they first saw each other. So there's a commonality. Mary knew of Elizabeth and John, knew what Gabriel said to John. Mary's the one that probably gave Luke the story about that, and they just recounted it because they didn't forget it,
Right. Zechariah had to communicate that to Elizabeth somehow.
Zechariah,
right.
Yeah,
and that's, clearly it gets transmitted some way,
exactly.
Or we wouldn't have it. Right.
That's exactly right. Maybe it was in his writing and stuff where they was found too. But and Mary's own story of Gabriel, Simeon and Anna's praises and prayers.
Favorite one.
Yeah. Why is Simeon your favorite?
So in Luke 2, whenever we get to this point where they're taking Jesus to the temple when he's a little toddler, and there's just this random crazy person that we probably would have, if you would have seen him, you think, wow, this guy's kind of wild. He kind of just bum rushes Joseph and Mary, and he has been waiting for the consolation of Israel because he was been told by the Holy Spirit that he is not going to die until he sees the Lord's Messiah. Somehow he knows that's him. And he runs and just kind of, hey, by the way, God told me these things. Can I hold your baby? Picks Jesus up and just starts blessing him, and then just kind of runs off prophesying, praising God. And then immediately after Simeon runs off, Anna comes up, and she does basically the same thing. And it's just this amazing story of people who had been looking forward to the coming of the Messiah, and how important that is. And I think that really drives home for Joseph and Mary how important Jesus is, that these two randos they've never met, who are just kind of out there, are prophesying over us and talking about that this child is set to turn Jerusalem on its head, that he will put everyone in a new context. And that's kind of a new revelation. And then what we see all the way through Luke 1 and 2 is that every time Mary is told something crazy like that, she doesn't freak out. She ponders it. She treasures it in her heart. And that tells you there's something different about Mary too, regardless of her age. And that's, so that's my favorite, Christmas story. It's not really Christmas time, but, I lump it in there. In Luke 2.
It's good. Can you imagine being Mary and experiencing all this stuff? The angel Gabriel, Elizabeth, Anna and Simeon, the shepherds, the Magi. Mary sees all this, and Mary's the only person in history that saw Jesus' birth and saw his death, and saw him after he resurrected. Yeah. It's pretty incredible.
I don't know if I've ever considered that.
Yeah, I read that somewhere. It's not original, sorry. But
hey, well, that's great.
But it is good to think about that. I mean, all the things that she witnessed, God did bless her on the earth, but she had a lot of heartache, like Simeon told her that she would,
pierce her soul.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Gotcha. So we've kind of covered the narrative of of both Elizabeth and Mary, and we kind of land with, okay, Jesus is born, we're going to the temple. What else do we need to know about Mary before we kind of get to our takeaways? Is there anything else you want to throw out there to kind of bring us to a head with Mary?
You know what you said a little while ago about, it's mentioned twice that Mary pondered these things. And that's just, she savored all these things, and that helped her. You know, we know that Joseph died at some point young. We don't know how young, and or died early in their marriage. They had 6 kids together, we believe, 4 boys and possibly 2 girls or something. But in you know, when Jesus goes at 12 years old, they find, you know, he's left behind, and he's stays in Jerusalem at the temple when they went there for the Passover, and he stays there, and they find him teaching in the temple, 12 years old, and he's astonishing everybody. Mm-hmm. And a thought came to me, I wonder where he slept. You know, and I thought, well, he might not have slept, you know.
Right.
I run on adrenaline a lot of times and stuff, so as campus ministers, I think we all kind of do that at some point. But
sleep is for the weak.
Yeah. But even after that, it says that she treasured these things in her heart, you know. And
that's in chapter 2, verse 18 and 19.
Yeah, there's a couple of places where it's written, one after that, and then another place. And that's just really cool. I remember when I was, and I'll tell this story real quick. I became a Christian when I was 19 years old, and I was unchurched. That I mostly remembered. I think up till I was 5, we went to church kind of frequently, but after that, I didn't remember much. Remember ever going as a family, but at 19, I gave my heart to Christ, and God. I was such a sinner, but I was so, you know, I was aware of my sin and stuff at that point, and I was a freshman in college, the end of my freshman year, in April 26th, by the way, 1980. That was a long time ago. Y'all don't repeat that, but anyway, it was. But God, I mean, it was immediate transformation in my life. Immediate. I knew the Holy Spirit had entered me. I was completely different instantly. And so within the next summer, I went as a summer missionary and got to go serve the Lord. Now, my parents had a hard time with that. Mm-hmm. They really did. They thought, honestly, I got involved in a cult. They really did. It scared them.
Sounds right.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Because I was so different, you know, right. And I wanted to go to church all the time, you know, and that was not me before. But anyway, while I was on the summer mission field, I got a call one night, and it was my mother, and she said, hey, did you call the preacher and tell him to come out here? And I said, no, ma'am, I didn't. I said, I haven't talked to him since I left. And she said, well, he and his assistant came out here tonight. And I was so glad they did, because I was ready, and I gave my heart to Jesus tonight. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm just, so that's one of those moments for me, like Elizabeth and Mary had, you know, but I'm speechless. I'm just overjoyed. Mm-hmm. You know, there's peace dancing in my heart.
Right.
And, but it was just one of those moments. And so I have a lot of those nuggets in me that I've pondered and I treasure in my heart, like Mary did. And I think all of us do, you know, as we start looking at that. All righty, takeaways.
Gotcha. All right, so at this point, we've hit the narrative. We've kind of hit it piece by piece. Mm-hmm. What are we supposed to do with this? I mean, because I think we could parse out all sorts of different things, and we can expand on them. We can talk about Hannah's prayer and Mary's prayer and her songs and how they're similar. But practically, what are we supposed to do now? Hit us with some knowledge.
Well, I hope these are helpful for you. They help me just to be able to write them down. One is we need to be wholehearted followers of Christ and live our faith out in private as much as we profess in public. And a good role model, like we saw, was Zechariah and Elizabeth. We need to also, second one, we need to love God above our dreams and not let our disappointments turn into bitterness.
So let's expand on that a little bit.
Let's do that.
Because I think there's, we've talked in previous sessions when we talked about Hannah, especially, and Leah and Rachel, we talked about how emotional those narratives are. Like there is a lot of emotion wrapped up in that, and we do in fact see some of that with Elizabeth. Is that, you know, she kind of takes off for a time and is not in public because she is anticipating the time when the Lord is taking away the reproach for not having children. Like, so clearly there's emotional baggage is the wrong word because it has the wrong connotation, but like there is a lot of emotional connectedness here. What is someone supposed to do if their heartfelt longing for something that they feel is a good thing that God gives other people, but not them? How am I supposed to handle that? Male, female, married, single, whatever. What is it that I'm supposed to do with that? With that in a little more detail, because we can see Mary and Elizabeth handling it in different ways than maybe we do. But what are we supposed to do in those situations?
You know, I love this symbolic of coming before the Lord with open hands, and this is your life, and you're not. Make sure that you don't have tentacles hanging on to. I want a husband and 3 children. I want that white picket fence house. It's laying those down before the Lord and being willing to say, God, whatever you want to bring in and out of my life, please do. I'm not going to have my hands hanging on and gripping so tight to the earth that I miss your greater blessing. And so it's just, I think it's just, you know, David modeled for us in the Psalms just to cry out to the Lord, you know, give him our heart, our soul, just let us be transparent with him. You can talk to God. You can pour your heart out to him.
That's what Zechariah was doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the temple.
Yes.
Like I don't want to sound trite or anything, but homeboy made the most of his time in the temple, right?
Good.
Like he is as close to holiness as he's ever going to be, and like that was his prayer.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm with you there, and I don't know how to talk about that solution without making it trite, because we make it trite. Like, oh, we just got to trust God that he's going to give you something better. Like, I think it's real easy for us to be cynical about that.
Yeah.
But we see over and over and over in Scripture that is precisely what happens with those folks who are having this heartfelt desire that is eventually fulfilled, and they recognize that even when we talk about Leah and Rachel and Hannah, like in the moments when they could have been superior because now they are blessed, they actually just give thanks to God instead of gloating.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that is the model. It's not trite. That is the model.
Yeah.
It might be difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think we land at the right point.
Yeah. You know, this came to my mind. I was called to ministry when I was 22, and I was 35 before I got full-time salary. I worked for beans, you know, before that, you know, and I got made more in seminary than I did as a campus minister, you know, anywhere for a long time, because I did a secular job. But you know what? It's that kind of thing of, you know, and I had to work hard to not let bitterness come in, because I saw people come, mostly men, come past me and go on and stuff, and get these jobs. And so you have to really go back, and it's over and over again thing. It's not a one and done deal. And for me, it wasn't anyway. I went to the Lord one time, it's yours. But no, I took it back. There were several times in my life I would take it back, and I would be in anguish over it, you know. But you just kind of keep coming. And finally, one day came, and it was right before my mother passed away, that one of the last things I was able to tell her was that I finally am getting a full-time salary, you know.
Hey,
so that's pretty cool.
That.
Yeah, that was a blessing for her, because she was, you know, it was a burden on her heart too, you know. So.
All right, so 2 takeaways down. What's our third one?
Good. God keeps his promises to fulfill his kingdom purposes. And we looked at that a little bit in Psalms 37:4, where when we delight ourselves in him, then he places his desires in our heart. And those are the desires that we need to be more focused on than our personal desires.
And it's not on our timing. It's his timing. Yes. Always.
That's exactly right. You know, here's a story that came to my mind this morning. I remember there was a girl in ministry years ago, and she just graduated high school, and she came in as a freshman, and she had her wedding all planned. Now, didn't have a fiance or a boyfriend at the time. Her wedding
was immaterial.
Yeah, her wedding was all planned, you know. And sure enough, she found somebody that would marry her, you know, during that time, and both of them loved the Lord and stuff, and so they got married. The marriage, I don't think, lasted a year. You know, it's those kind of things to make sure that our wedding is not what's important. It's our marriage. You know, it's those kind of things that you just examine. Okay, do I have the right thing here? Is it my desire, or is it God's? So, okay, God's timing is perfect, and His timing not only. I think you said it well.
I jumped the gun.
Yeah,
Stole your
no,
thunder.
no, that's good. It's just He brings everything. He makes everything beautiful in His time. We used to sing a song about that. Long-awaited answers to prayers leads to the most beautiful expressions of humility, worship, and testimonies of God's faithfulness. And when I shared with you about my sister, praying for 40 years for her and everything, and seeing God change her life, and the timing of it is just really beautiful. And it's that heart desire of, praying for her for so many years. And, I told her about Jesus a lot early on,
right.
And so much so that I needed to not tell her, keep telling her, but just I started praying that God would do in her what He did in me, and bring friends and other people around who could help explain to her about the gospel, that she would maybe more listen to. Family is, it's a little sister. It's a different story.
Right.
So, when we need encouragement, I love this. When we need encouragement the most, God connects us to Himself, and oftentimes to another person or others who are in similar situations, who are like-minded, or who are spiritual-minded, like you are in that case. Like Gabriel said, "Oh, and by the way,
your relative,
Elizabeth, she's pregnant.
the one who shouldn't be pregnant."
Hit. And she's like, "Man, I got somebody I can go talk to."
Right.
It's those kind of things, those kind of moments. And I don't know about you, but I've seen God do that in my life many, many times, where He just moves in my heart, and there seems to be, I don't know what He's doing, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a conversation, maybe with somebody you've never been in conversation with, that identifies with where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so my biggest thing that I want to encourage you to do is this. This is the seventh one. I couldn't leave with 6. I had to have 7. So anyway, but you college students, God has used college students to change lives in so many people. He's called many of you guys, He's called to ministry at that age, to the mission field. You're at that time in your life where you've got everything to give God. And I want to just encourage you to do that. And that's what Mary did. Mary was like, yes, my yes is on the table. It's what my pastor says a lot, is your yes on the table. Let your yes be on the table and not be holding anything underneath the table. But, what about this? I'm going to hold this back. No, lay everything out on the table for the Lord. When we're young adults, surrendering our lives in future sets us on a path of seeing God's faithfulness in our lives and for generations to come in the lives of people around us.
Excellent. Well, I think this has been a lot. I know this is a lot to kind of take in, but frankly, I think you've done a good job of summarizing this in such a way that it's all palatable, where it's digestible for us. But I don't think that we're going to be called hey, in the next 5 minutes, you should be able to work these 7 things out and you're good to go.
Right,
This is something that's a continual call to constantly be looking to be obedient, to constantly look to be trusting, to believe in God, and be obedient at whatever phase that you find yourself in there. And I know that's going to be one of the hardest things for us to kind of work through, but that's literally the point of our Connect groups. We want to give you that opportunity to see the possibilities of being obedient to God wherever you may be found. Your Connect group leaders can help you do that. I can help you do that. BIT can help you do that. We want to make sure that whatever you need to be obedient, that's there. So, BIT, what is your final parting shot? Anything else you want to say to anybody that's watching, that's kind of the closing thought that you would want us to hear before we close out here?
I think of Hudson Taylor, and I hope I don't butcher this who God calls, He empowers. And He is faithful. God is faithful. Whatever He calls you to do, and if it's just simply living the life that through your major and working and everything, surrender everything to Him. He's worth every bit of it. In His kingdom, here on earth and also in glory, there's nothing that beats that. Live for Him. Live for His glory. Live for His agenda, not yours.
That's good. Well, BIT, once again, thank you for coming and opening this up with us and having this conversation. I pray that y'all find it beneficial and that you would get some real clarity over what we're supposed to do with this narrative that maybe we're really familiar with, but really we're not. So once again, thank you. Guys, I want y'all to just hang around. We will have discussion questions down below in the video description. I'm going to give us a little bit of a recap here in just a bit. So yeah, once more, thank you, Bit.
Thank you, Lee.
I appreciate it. Hey guys, thank you for being here. I know that this was a longer video than what we have had recently. We normally try to keep it to about 35 minutes total, and I know we went over that, but hey, I'm glad you stuck around to the very end. I just want to point your direction or your attention down to below in the video description where we've got all of our discussion questions. There's about 9 or so down there. There's some that are pretty involved. I want to draw your attention to 2 of them. The first one I want to draw your attention to is number 4. That question that really talks about what it means to be walking blamelessly before God, and does that correlate to God just giving us whatever we want? And clearly the answer to that is no, but I want you guys to explore that question to really talk about what it means to long for something even though that you know you're doing what God would have you do, and how we work that out in real life. The second question or set of questions I want you guys to discuss is number 8, and the question about joy, and what is the thing that brings you the most joy in your life? Well, man, what happens if that thing were to fail you? What does that tell us about pointing to a greater thing that might not fail us? I want y'all to spend some time talking about those things. Guys, I love you. I'm glad that y'all stuck around for this longer video, and we want to end like we always do and with our benediction of sorts, and that's by saying do good and don't sin.